Hey folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. Hope everyone's doing well. Normally, I never discuss what we would generally call fantasy fight kind of situations. I've always said that when I assess boxers, whether it's heavyweights or anything else, I look at a bunch of different metrics. How many fights they've had, how many championship defenses they had, how many Hall of Famers beaten, those sorts of things. And I've talked about it so much that, you can find my metrics in a number of places, but specifically, you could find them episode 1 of my top 10 heavyweights of all time. And I explain them in detail. But yesterday, I was having a conversation with Bill from Bill Knows Boxing, and he asked me, who do I think would win between Lennox Lewis and Alexander Usyk? And I found myself kind of torn as well, because, of course, I was a big Lennox Lewis fan, and I'm a big Alexander Usyk fan. And while I don't normally engage in sort of fantasy fight stuff, I did put my thinking cap on a little bit and gave an answer. And I thought, it's possibly of interest to people who watch this channel. Now, of course, because this isn't a resume or CV breakdown, there isn't much objectivity, right? This is the problem with fantasy fight things. It's you could be right, somebody else could be right, and because there's no objective metric that people can look at, honestly, your guess is as good as anybody else's, right? But I thought, okay, I'll take a stab. And I figure that whether you come down on one side or the other, you're going to upset a bunch of people anyhow. But I thought, the lion versus the cat. Okay. Well, let's have a look at Lennox's strengths. Now, Lennox is the bigger man. And you've got to pick your version of Lennox, right? So most people would not pick the version of Lennox that fought Vitaly Klitschko. They'd probably go back and pick a somewhat younger version of Lennox. But then you don't want to be too young because Lennox matured kind of late, right? You remember, like, Riddick Bowe and Lennox are the same age, but Riddick Bowe developed much earlier than Lennox. Lennox was a late developer, if you like. But you've got to pick a version, right? And I don't know. Do you pick the version that beat Hasim Rahman, on the rematch? Devastating knockout. Yeah. Anyways, you decide which version you're going to pick. And likewise with Usyk. I mean, do you pick the version that just stopped Dubois, or do you pick a slightly younger version? For me, I don't know. For Usyk, when was Usyk at his best? Maybe the second AJ fight? I'm not sure, anyhow, but that's something that you'd have to do, right? But what I did is I thought, okay, well, what are Lennox's strengths? Well, he's a bit taller. He's 6'5", versus Usyk's 6'3". And he's got an 84-inch reach, which is more than Usyk's 78-inch reach. So he would have the height and the reach advantage. Weight, well, Lennox could carry more weight on his frame than could Usyk. But much of the time that Lennox fought, he didn't fight at, a very heavy weight, right? You know, I'm just looking at box rank. He fought Holyfield at 242. He fought McCall 251. We go back down. He fought Razor Ruddock. What was he at Razor Ruddock? He's 227. So, you go back a little bit further, earlier on in his career. 227 in 1991 against Gary Mason. So, you know, Lennox 220 something to, well, let's see, what was he weighing against Klitschko? 256 and a half. So it's like a 25-pound spread or so there, right? You know, 25, 30-pound spread. So Lennox would probably have tipped the scales against Alexander Usyk somewhere in the 240s. You know, that's not a bad guess, right? So let's say he would have 20 pounds on Usyk. But Usyk, of course, you know, has no real problem in giving up 20 pounds to his opponent. Experience. Well, in the pro ranks, Lennox would have, you would think, you know, more experience. 41 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw, right? Whereas Alexander Usyk, you know, he would be more of 24-0. So less experience in the pro ranks. Amateur ranks? Well, I'm not sure what amateur experience tells us, but Usyk has got more amateur experience. So could we extrapolate experience to ring IQ? Probably not, but I think you could just say, you know, experience, right? And what would be Lennox's other attributes? He's tasted defeat. So if you picked a version of Lennox who fought post his first loss against McCall, he would have tasted defeat and so therefore would know how to come back. Let's look at Usyk's. What does Usyk weigh on average? Yeah, 227 or in and around there, right? 6'3", 78-inch reach. Never seemed to struggle with size difference, though. I think we could say that Usyk would have certain advantages. I think, and this is close. This is, you know, I think that Usyk would have the better technical boxing skills, but Lennox would have more power and more one-shot power. Usyk, I think, is the better athlete, but Lennox is no slouch. I think Usyk's the better athlete. He's certainly the better athlete late in his career, but, you know, we pick a version, right? The southpaw advantage. Usyk is more experienced fighting orthodox fighters than Lennox is fighting southpaws. And that's always the southpaw advantage, right? Discipline. It's hard to imagine Usyk filming Ocean's 11 when he should be really, you know, getting ready for a big fight. So could we say that Usyk has more discipline? Possibly. Yes. I think yes. That's not to say that Lennox Lewis was ill-disciplined, but I think Usyk is very special. How does this fight go? I don't think that Usyk would have this as plain sailing, and he may find himself in difficulties. Lennox is such a good finisher, right? If he had Usyk hurt, he wouldn't be letting him off the hook. But look how Usyk, who was hurt by Fury in rounds, 5, 6, 7 of the first fight, how he prevailed. I think, just one guy's opinion, and I hate doing fantasy fight stuff for this very reason, I think Usyk gets a points win over Lennox Lewis. If Lennox is going to win, I see Lennox stopping Usyk around round 8 or 9. So since I'm going to come down on one side or the other, I can't say, I've got a massive piece of wood sticking in my butt here from sitting on the fence. I think Alexander Usyk prevails over Lennox Lewis. And it kind of pains me to say, because Lennox Lewis is, rates really high in my all-time top 10, right? It's a tough one. I think I would, there's no way of ever knowing, right? So if you say I'm talking out of my rear end and I'm totally wrong, I'm not going to be offended by that, because there's no way of us knowing, right? I think Alexander Usyk prevails. But I'm really interested to know in what you think. Do you think Lennox would prevail over Usyk? Or do you think Usyk prevails over Lennox? The two generational greats, most likely when Usyk has retired and all the dust is settled, they will both, of course, be considered all-time greats. I think Lennox is already considered an all-time great, provided Usyk doesn't go on and accumulate loads and loads of losses, which seems unlikely. Let me know what you think. I think this is an interesting question. And I will tell you that my first blush response was, Lennox, because he's bigger and stronger. And then I dwelled on it for another couple of minutes, and I thought, well, Usyk is used to fighting bigger and stronger people. But, and this is a very big but, Usyk has beaten Dubois, AJ, Fury, none of whom are in the same qualitative class as Lennox Lewis. My opinion. I know some people say that Fury is better than Lennox, but I usually think those are people who are working for Queensberry or associated with Fury, because I don't think there are that many fans who really believe that. But hey, I don't know. Let me know what you think. I look forward to reading your comments in the comment section. Have a fabulous day. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.